All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the first Writing Center workshop of fall 2020. My name is Tom Stearns. I'm the director of the Writing Center, and I'm going to talk to you all today about writing emails as a college student. So here's an overview of what we'll discuss today. So first, we're just going to talk about whether email is the best option for the type of communication that you're going to send. Then if we are going to send an email, then let's talk about how we compose that email. So how should you begin your email? How can you communicate effectively through email? And how should you close your email? And then finally, we'll end with a couple miscellaneous questions and then your questions. So the first step, right, is email my best option? So we live in an instant gratification culture, right? If I have a thought, I make it happen. Oftentimes with a device, a handheld device or on my computer. You know, I have a question, I Google it, I get an immediate response. I want to watch something, I turn on the TV and I get it on demand, right? Well, one of the side effects of all of this is that we can get some awkward emails sometimes. So I might get an email that looks like this. What's the homework this week, LOL. And if what you're used to is not emails, but you're used to text messages or more informal messaging apps and things like that, that might seem like a totally reasonable message. But email is actually more like a letter, not like a text message. So here you can see just an example of a typical email that you might receive from a coworker, from an instructor, and so. Instructors and staff members at the college, we expect students to have some sort of familiarity with email and treat them kind of like a letter rather than like a text message. All of that said, like I was saying before, you have a thought, we make it happen. We have this kind of instant effect in our culture. But so when we're going to send an email, when we have the thought that we're going to send an email, before we just pull up our phone and make it happen, pause and just ask yourself, is email my best option? So we're going to go through a few questions to help you figure out whether email is the best option for the situation. So keep in mind your instructor is available to you through different means. So yeah, there's email. There's also office hours. And if you haven't used instructor's office hours before, I'll tell you just real briefly about it. Office hours is a time when your instructor is available for students. They set that time aside on their schedule so that if students have any questions, they can just pop right in and get their questions answered. And so they might be short questions, might be long questions, might be an in-depth back and forth, might be advice, that type of stuff. So office hours are reserved for that. You know, in our current digital education zone that we're in right now, office hours are pretty much online, but you can find information about the office hours. I'm going to show you really quickly. Well, one place you can find them is in the syllabus. Another place you can find them is on the GHC website, so you may want to check that out. You also have access to your instructor during live class discussions. So, in the classroom when you're attending a lecture or something like that, there's going to be times when your instructor asks you if you have questions. Sometimes you might stay after class and ask your instructor questions if they have time. And then lastly, there are asynchronous discussion boards. So many instructors in their Canvas shell have, usually towards the top of the page, when you log in, you'll see something that says, like discussion board or general questions about this class or ask your instructor anything, those types of things. So we've got discussion boards as well. So ask yourself two questions when we're trying to figure out, which one of these four is best for my communication needs. Ask yourself just two questions. Will I have a better experience with this communication in public or in private? And will I have a better experience in real time or not in real time? So different situations have different needs. So let's take a look at public and private. So these first two at the top, a live class discussion or a discussion board, these are public discussions, right? Public communications. So in public works great for matters of general concern that may affect others and not just you. So for example, if I have a question about the class and I'm, let's say I'm sitting there in class and I'm kind of confused by what's being discussed, and I look around and I see, a couple other students are also kind of looking a little confused or something like that. Totally appropriate to raise my hand and ask a question and say, can you explain a little more about blah, 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 or I'm not understanding this and this. So that might be because it's maybe affecting other people as well. Discussion board might be a great place for that type of question as well. In private works well for specific matters and ones that only concern you or sensitive matters. So office hours, right? That's where you get some kind of one-on-one time with your instructor. Email, that's a private communication. That's a good place to discuss things that only concern you or sensitive matters. You wouldn't want to raise your hand in the middle of a class, in this public setting and ask a private question and say something like, last week I did my homework like this and you marked off like 1 point for this. Like, that's not a good question for a public setting, right? That'd be good for office hours or email. Sensitive matters too. You might not want to post about those on your discussion board in class where everybody else could read it. So the second question to ask, right, will I have a better experience with this communication in real time or not in real time? So notice these two on the left, these happen in real time. A live class discussion, that's going on, right, in real time. Office hours, that's a live face-to-face interaction. Discussion boards and email, these are not in real time. So these are asynchronous communications. So in real time is good for open-ended questions. And open-ended questions are questions that don't have a specific yes or no or this or that type of answer, but it's more like the how questions, the why questions. Those bigger, broader questions are open-ended questions. That's good for in real time because sometimes there's going to need to be some back and forth that needs to happen for those open-ended questions. And it may not be, so for example, discussion boards and emails, the answer might get a little too long for those types of mediums. For elaborate answers, like I was saying, if we have an in-depth answer or we're expecting an in-depth answer to our question, maybe from the instructor, then office hours or live class discussion would be a good time for that. And if there's going to be lots of back and forth to reach understanding or a consensus, sometimes you have a simple question and it gets a simple answer. Sometimes you have a simple question, but it's going to take some teasing out. It's going to take some back and forth. Well, what do you mean by this? And then answer. And then, okay, but if that, and then, go back and forth in that conversation to understand, to get to a good answer. Those types of conversations are better for real time rather than for not in real time. So not in real time is good for closed-ended questions. So if I've got a yes or no question for you, if I've got a this or that type question for you, if your instructor's got that ask me anything type discussion board at the top of the page, that's a good place for that. If they've got an email, so it's a private concern, that's a great place to ask those yes or no questions. If you're seeking a simpler response, you're not expecting this to turn into a big, philosophical discussion, email and discussion boards are good for that. And also when responses require time to process. So in real time, right, we're processing things externally in the moment. And sometimes we have questions that we're going to have, it'll be better to, for people to have that time to process. So if you're going to ask your instructor a question, but it's going to take them some time to process, or you think they're going to have to do some research to get the best answer for you, those are great, great matters for a discussion board or an email. And one thing I want to clarify before we move on, when I'm talking about discussion boards, I'm not talking about the discussion boards that you have for homework assignments. For those homework assignments, you are going to have maybe some of these open-ended questions. There's going to be elaborate answers, and your instructors will expect you to engage in some back and forth to reach understanding. I'm talking about those discussion boards that are more, ask me questions type of discussion boards, the not required discussion boards. So sometimes instructors will want you to use discussion boards. So for example, sometimes I get a question emailed to me, and it's a great question, but it's not a private question. It's actually a question that most of the other students in class would want to know the answer to. So sometimes I'll write back to my student and say, that's a great question, post it to the discussion board and I'll answer it. So that way we can have that question be aired publicly. So let's discuss a few examples. And so I'm going to call on the visitors in our meeting today. Feel free to shout out any of your thoughts or answers. We'll kind of talk through the answers here. So here's a scenario. So I want to talk to my instructor about whether a certain career is right for me. So ask yourself, is this a question to have in public? Does it involve other people, or in private? Does it just involve me? And then ask yourself, is this a question to have in real time? Is this going to involve a lot of back and forth, or kind of broader questions? Or is this better for not in real time? Is this like a quick hit, closed-ended, easy, simple answer type of question? Any thoughts, any suggestions? How do you view that type of scenario? And that's all right. I'll go ahead and share my thoughts on it. So I'm thinking in this case, this is something that is probably a better discussion for in private rather than in public. I'm asking about whether something's right for me. So this is going to be a personal concern. This is totally a type of question you might talk to your instructor about. Your instructors have experience in the field that you're studying. And so if you have questions about careers in that field, instructors are a great person to talk to about that. So I might want to make that be in private. So then would it be better for office hours or email? So are we expecting that conversation to kind of turn into a big conversation, or do we think it's going to be like a quick, oh, yes or no type of thing? Well, we've got to figure out whether a certain career is right for you. I mean, that's going to be a question that you're going to spend more than just one conversation to figure out, right? So that might be a better conversation for office hours rather than email, because I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth. The instructor is going to want to ask you, well, what do you think about this? What can you tell me about that? Do you prefer this type of workplace or that type of workplace? There's going to be a lot of questions and answers going on to help you reach an understanding there. So office hours would be great for that type of communication. Doesn't mean you can't ask it in these other settings necessarily, but ideally, I think you're going to get the best experience if you ask it in office hours. Let's take a look at another scenario. So I want to find out if any of my classmates have real-world experiences with the subject matter from this week's reading. So just got a kind of a curiosity, and it's maybe not for my instructor even, it's just kind of for everybody in my class, maybe instructor included. So would this be better to discuss in public or in private? And do you think this would be better to discuss in real time or not in real time? Any thoughts on that?
I think it would be a good topic for a discussion board. And yeah, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in real time, since especially for online classes, everybody's doing their classwork at a different time of day.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. I think discussion boards is the best place for this. If we were to raise this question in live class discussion, depends on the situation. So if you've got kind of time built into your class, let's say, and I agree with what you're saying. I think most of the classes that we have right now are happening pretty much asynchronously. Some classes have like a designated time and place where you log into the Zoom room. And even, imagine like back in the traditional classroom, you got like, 25 people all in one room. Then even in that situation, raising this question, have any of my classmates had real world experiences with this? This might create a distraction from the subject matter at hand. In real time, in a live class discussion, your instructor's got an agenda for the class. And so you wouldn't want to necessarily like, throw a wrench in the works for that by asking a curiosity type question like that. It would be absolutely great for a discussion boards because people could respond in real time, and it's a public question, right? I want lots of feedback from different people. It's not a private question. All right, take a look at another example. So the professor said blah, blah, blah last week, but this week they're saying blah, blah, blah. It's hard to square those two statements. What type of question or what type of communication would this be? Do you think a public or a private act? Do you think it would be in real time or not in real time?
Well, if you send it to the class, I would think that it would be something you want to discuss as a group.
So it'd be public, yeah.
Yeah. And if there are live classes going on, and you could do it briefly, I guess you could do it during the class. But if it's more involved, you might want to take it to a discussion board so you don't disrupt the class.
Yeah, so different considerations there. So yeah, do I think it's going to be, is it going to turn into like a big thing? Then maybe I don't want to derail the class. I might want to, put that into a discussion board, something like that. If it seems like it's a simple thing, like something's just catching here, and I think there's going to be, I think just bringing it to my instructor's attention is going to help them like say, I see what you're saying. It's actually blah, blah, blah. And they'll be able to sort it out really easy. And yeah, go for the live class discussion. All that said, who knows what the communication, that's one of the things about communication. We don't know how it's going to turn out. And so, we don't expect you to predict exactly what the right one, but just to think about, in this situation, is this better for this or that? And just use your gut. Take a look at the next one. I'd like to get some reading recommendations from my instructor on the topic we read about this week. So what do you think about that one? Public or private, real time or not in real time?
I would say that this is something that would apply to the entire class, and I don't think it needs to happen in real time, although it could. I mean, I would probably put it on the discussion board again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great answer. That's exactly what I was thinking of this one too. And it may depend, if you have very like niche interests that no one else in the class would be interested in for some reason, that might be a private matter. But if it's related to the reading this week, then yeah, that sounds like a public thing, because you never know when other students in that class might be interested. So I might not email this question to my instructor. I might use the discussion board for that, exactly. And my thought about this one is, if I'm asking my instructor for reading recommendations, they might want to take a little bit of time to get back to me about that. They might want to look through their books and look through and discover if there are any things that they haven't read yet, but that exist out there because they haven't been asked this question before. So that's something that we'd maybe want to ask not in real time. We'd probably get a good response in real time too. I bet the instructor could maybe list off 1 or 2 books on the topic, but giving them some time to get that information, that'd be a great opportunity. So discussion board would be fantastic for that. Okay, 2 more examples. This is doing great so far. So I need to ask my instructor where their office is located, and I'll give you this is a trick question here. Where would be the best way to handle this question?
Well, I would first of all check the syllabus and check for online before I bothered him with that question. But then I don't know. I mean, if you're scheduled for an appointment and you need to be there in a few minutes, you might need to call them up or email them and get the address so you're not late. I don't know.
Fantastic. I love your reasoning there. All of that was perfect. Yeah. So yeah, first question to ask is syllabus, right? Is this information that I can get in the syllabus or through some other means online? So there is a directory. If you go to the GHC website, there's a phone directory right at the top. And if you click on an instructor's information, an instructor's name in the phone directory, you'll be linked to their office hours schedule, and it'll even list where their office is located. Now, right now, obviously, all of our offices are in our homes or on Zoom, and so for most of us anyway. And so, but that information definitely will be listed in your syllabus, and so that's something that you'll want to take a look at. But yeah, and that's a good point about if you have an urgent communication, and we'll talk in a moment a little bit more about that, then you may need to think on the fly and think, okay, should I find their find their email and just send them an email really quick? Should I call them? Probably the best answer, especially if they're in their office waiting for you. Yeah, give them a call. All right, last scenario. I didn't understand a key part in today's lecture, but everyone else seemed to get it. This be public or private, real time or not in real time?
Yeah, if everyone else seemed to get it, then you may not want to waste everybody else's time having him go over it with you again. You might want to make that a private conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably go for office hours. That's what he's set up to do. If you have the time to wait, otherwise you could do an email if you want to try and get a quicker response.
Fantastic. You are like going 5 for 5 here. Fantastic response. Yeah, office hours is definitely the best place for this. So like you said, this should probably happen in private, not in public. It seems like everybody else got it. It's fine to ask that in public because maybe you're not the only one. So never like hold your tongue because you're worried about, looking silly or having a stupid question or anything like that. I hate that phrase. So don't worry about that. But still, if it seems like everybody's moving on and you're not, that might be a good thing to, that might be a reason to like seek out individual assistance or individual support here. This is also a good one for tutoring as well. So you might check out e-tutoring for this subject. But if there was a key part and it seemed like there's just something missing, and a discussion with your instructor would clear that up, that's the perfect type of situation for office hours. And again, that might be something, a conversation for in real time, not for not in real time. Because if you sent an email about that, if you said like, I'm kind of confused about today's lecture, can you explain it? It doesn't give your instructor much to go on. They're kind of then stuck with like, how do I explain this? I don't know what part is missing. So they need to ask some probing questions of you to help figure out where the gap in understanding is. So that's where that live conversation is going to be really beneficial. All right, great job. So here's the last point I want to make. So is this an urgent matter? So like I was saying, yeah, if you've got an urgent matter, you've got an appointment and you can't find them, then making a phone call is great. Bear in mind that during times of COVID right now, we're all operating from our homes. A lot of us don't actually have access to our phone line. I don't know if other instructors do. And so what I'll say is that email tends to be pretty good. You can also check your instructor's office hours. Maybe they have office hours just starting in a half an hour from now, and then that might be faster than sending an email. But it's going to be one of these two probably for an urgent matter. Okay. All right, so last thing about whether I should email or not. So ask yourself before you email, might the answer be in the syllabus? And good job with that response earlier. You knew exactly where to look. So office hours usually get listed in the syllabus. Contact information, other things get listed in the syllabus too. So you'll want to check that out. If it's not an urgent matter, definitely check that out. There's no reason to send a lot of emails out if you can find the answer yourself, right? Check Canvas. Oftentimes there's information in Canvas, and I know there can be a lot of information in Canvas, but give Canvas a check, because usually instructors will usually put like resources and things like that either at the top of the Canvas page or at the bottom of the Canvas page. So check out Canvas, see if the information is in there or in announcements in Canvas. Or is it on the GHC website? So you could just go to Google or Bing or some search engine and type in ghc.edu space and then whatever your question is. You might find that really quickly. The bottom line, don't overthink it, but do think before you send your email. And sometimes professors can get mixed up about whether we ought to email or speak in person too. People in places of business have this. This is just, I see this all the time. I do this all the time myself. Sometimes I'll be having a conversation with somebody and somebody will get an email back from somebody and be like, you know what, I just need to go over there and talk to them. Like the email is just like spiraling out of control. So, it happens. And so don't worry about like sending the wrong thing, but just be aware that there are different, you can have a better experience or not a great experience depending on which venue you choose to ask your question or to seek out information. So we want you to ask your questions no matter what the venue, but also like be understanding if we sometimes can't address the question fully over email. So follow up with an office hours visit if that's the case. So a good example of that one is maybe the one I was talking about earlier where you've got, like, I didn't understand this one thing in class. Like, okay, I don't know if I can explain that over email, like come into office hours and let's talk about it. So be understanding of that type of situation. Not everything, email's not the panacea for all ills. Lastly, recognize that college is an ideal time to work to develop your interpersonal and face-to-face communication skills. So if you do feel like, you know what, I am all about that email, I have a need, I pick up my phone, I do it, and then it's off my plate. If you feel like that's your kind of go-to response for everything, think about, okay, this is a good time to build some more, some additional skills outside of, you're using your phone or your computer. So take advantage of those opportunities. All right, so let's get into how do I write the email? Like, what do I need to think about, or what's a good way to compose this email? So first step, fill in the subject line. And so the subject line you can see here, this is when you're sending an email in Canvas. It looks like this, right? You got the compose message screen. You want to put a subject line that is short So you don't want it to be like a whole sentence or like super long. Usually only a short amount will appear in the inbox of your reader. So you want it to be short, but it should be long enough to clearly state the main idea of your email. So look at these examples. So Pres, as opposed to next week's presentation deadline. You can tell Pres would be a confusing email subject, right? What are we talking about? Present, president, presentation? Like that's not totally clear. So you want it to be short, but not too short. Homework or question about essay 2. So this first one, maybe the student meant homework questions and didn't want to spell questions, but just put a lot of question marks. But the reader is going to take a look at that. Your instructor is going to see that in their inbox and read homework. We don't want to go that route, right? So be clear, be specific, right? You want to clearly state the main idea of your email. So don't just put question, right? A question about what? So here, right, we're talking about the presentation deadline, the essay number 2. Like try to be specific and pointed in your subject line. Start your email with a greeting, and you can see on this last one, right? Dear Mr. Gutierrez. That's a great way to start an email. It's classic, traditional from decades and centuries before. Start your letter with dear, that's fine. You can also say hello and then their name, good morning and then their name, and then move to a new line and then start your email. That's a great way to start your email. So it's standard in emails just to provide a greeting. You'll sometimes see emails that don't have a greeting, and that's usually in a situation where the email has turned into a bit of a text message chain, right? So an initial email, I will always provide a greeting in an initial email. It's when, we start having a back and forth and we are sending an email to each other every 1 or 2 minutes. This happens sometimes, when 2 people are working together on a project in real time and they're emailing in real time. Then we're not sending a greeting every single time. But when you're sending an initial email, or if you're checking back and it's been a day since you got the last email or something, it's standard to start with a greeting. So don't turn it into a text message unless it's happening in real time. Avoid these types of greetings. So hey, that's a little informal, a little too personal. So let's stay away from that. What's up, Doc? Like, that's cute, but we don't need to be, cute in our email. Try to keep it, keep it professional. And you can make a joke if it's appropriate. There's go your own way with the email, but with a greeting, just a standard greeting is what is expected. Avoid this. So I was going to go to your office hours, but I forgot where they are. And just jump into your email with no greeting. Again, it's not a text message, so for an initial email, provide a greeting every single time. Address your instructor appropriately. So what goes in this blank here? Do I say doctor? Do I say Mr.? Do I say their first name? Do I say Ms. or Mrs.? Do I say... You can always say instructor last name, and that you'll always be appropriate and correct. So if I got an email saying, dear instructor Stearns, comma, blah, 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 perfect. That is absolutely fine. It's appropriate. It's always correct. The only issue with it is it's a little awkward. Nobody actually goes around, nobody walks up to me and says hello, Instructor Stearns. There's something about that word instructor. It's just a little awkward, but it's absolutely appropriate for an email. You will always be right and you will always be appropriate. So if you have any questions or you're not sure, just go this route. You're perfectly fine. That said, as a college student, I remember I had the same feelings about names that you probably have, which is every instructor has different rules. Some instructors are doctors, some instructors are not, some instructors are professors, some instructors are not. It's confusing, right? So I'll give you a little bit of advice. First thing to do, get to know your instructors' names and titles. You only have 3 or 4 instructors per quarter. These are human beings. These are people who want to connect with you in a professional, in an educational relationship and help you grow. So think of your instructors as people, not as just kind of random teachers who are all the same. So get to know their names. How do they spell their names? Like, that's important. Your instructor is going to get to know your name over the course of the quarter. And your instructor's probably got like 75 or 100 students this quarter. So I entreat you, you can learn 3 or 4 instructors' names. And when you do, you'll start to think of them. If you don't already, you'll start to think of them more as like, oh, this is like a person I can connect with and have a human interaction with. So doctor and professor are always respectful, but they're not always correct. And we don't need to go into the ins and outs of who gets called a doctor, who gets called a professor. You can research that if you're interested, but just know that they're always respectful. That's always fine. Some instructors may correct you. They may be like, oh, but I'm not a doctor, or I'm not professor, or whatever. So don't be ashamed by that or anything like that. We don't expect you to keep track of who's got PhDs and who's whatever. Just be aware that you may be incorrect. So a good bit of advice that I remember receiving when I was an undergraduate student, I asked my counselor, I wanted to reach out to this one instructor about a project that I was doing, and I didn't know how to address him. And in my first email, I addressed him, as doctor and then his last name, and sent my email. And then he wrote back, and I was just like, at that point I'd had a couple projects with other faculty at the college. And so I was on a first name basis with some of the faculty. And I was like, how do I know if I address this person by their last name or their first name or whatever? And she gave me great advice. She said, pay attention to how they sign their messages in their emails. If they're signing off Tom, then you can call them Tom. If they want you to call them Dr. or, Mr. Stearns, they would be signing their emails Mr. Stearns. Like, we're aware of that as we're composing our emails. So that was really great advice. That helped me out a lot. That said, you can also always ask, how do you prefer to be addressed? That's perfectly fine too. That's a great question to ask if you're ever unsure. Nobody will be taken aback by that question or feel like you should already know. Nobody will ever respond that way. So I know as a student, sometimes you can feel like I don't want to embarrass myself by asking this question. It's not embarrassing. You gotta, assert yourself to get the information you need to just to have the communication. And different instructors may have different preferences, so that's something to keep in mind. Personally, I prefer that my students address me by my first name. It's just how I envision the work relationship. I've never had a boss in my life who demanded that I address them as doctor or Mr. or anything like that. It's always been a first name basis, and we've kept it professional. So that's kind of my mindset about it. Doesn't mean that that every instructor wants you to call them by their first name. Many instructors do expect you to address them as doctor or Ms. or whatever the title is. So pay attention to that. Be aware of that. Last thing about addressing people and using names, 2 things to avoid. Avoid addressing an instructor by last name only. Do not walk up to your instructor and say, "Good morning, Thompson." I think sometimes students do this because they don't know whether they're doctor or professor or Mr. And so they don't want to make a mistake. So they just jump straight to the last name. It's a little awkward. The only situation where we ever address somebody by a last name is if we're like on a football team together, or if you're my commandant in the military and you are addressing me as your subordinate, you might call me just by my last name. Kind of awkward to walk up to a professor and talk to them that way. Unless, of course, the instructor says, "I want you guys to address me by my last name and no title." Sometimes that happens. You'll have instructors who may want that. So in that case, if they've said that's what they prefer, go ahead and say that. Otherwise, avoid that. That's a little awkward. Give some sort of a title, whether it's professor, instructor, etc. Also avoid this. Avoid addressing an instructor by title and first name. So it's a little awkward to walk up to somebody and say, "Hello, Dr. Stephanie," or "Hello, Mr. Tom." It's a little cutesy. It's kind of sounds like a children's TV show or something. That said, some instructors prefer this. Some instructors have kind of like a personal brand, like "I'm Dr. Tom" or something like that. So that's going to happen too. So again, I think the takeaway here is be aware of who you're speaking to and just if they have any preferences there. Otherwise, default instructor, last name, you're golden. All right, so how can I communicate effectively over email? So just the just typing out the first line, good morning, Instructor Stearns. That took us 10 minutes to figure out how to write, right? But communicating effectively, it's pretty simple, and I'll go over some tips here. So a helpful first sentence, just in your first sentence, right? Say, dear Mr. Stearns, comma, this is blah, 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 and I'm in your blah, blah, blah class this quarter. Just identify yourself. Next, in your next sentence, just state the purpose of your email directly. State it early on in your email. I'm writing to find out blank. I'm writing because I want to ask you blah, blah, blah. This message is so that I can blah, blah, blah. Like, just tell us why you're emailing. Keep the email short and to the point. Real time is better suited for storytelling and elaborate discussion. If you send an email that's like 1,000 words long, I'll still read it, but it's a little awkward because there may be points where I want to interject, or I want this to be a real communication, but I'm just kind of a captive audience, so to speak, just kind of reading your 1,000 words of your message. So, and there's times and places where that's the thing to do, but as a general rule, avoid it. Real time is better for that type of long communication. Make any requests or expectations that you have very clear. So for example, if you're requesting a letter of recommendation from an instructor that you've worked with and done a good job with, you would maybe ask them, could you please, state very clearly, and maybe state this towards the beginning of the email too, so it's not buried somewhere. Could you please write me a letter of recommendation? I would need this by blah, 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 and then attach any details, information that they might need to help with that. So if you do have any requests in your email, make that very, very clear. Don't let it get buried. So in terms of, think of this as like a template for sending an effective email. And you might feel like, oh, this is like, I don't like templates. Like, I don't want that to like harsh my style. Like, I have my own personal communication style, and I want to like have my own types of emails. I get it, but email should be predictable. Email is something that people do like in the course of their workday, right? It's not necessarily like a creative writing opportunity. So think of email, the more predictable you make your email, the easier it is for your reader to process and respond fully to your needs that you're expressing in that email. So now what about the style? How about how you shape the language of your email? So make a positive professional impression. So try not to make like a negative impression, try not to make an unprofessional impression, right? So pay attention. Think of every email you send in college. Think of this as developing your professional skills that you're going to use moving forward after you graduate. Think of college as work. Think of it as a job, like you're in a workplace, and then you'll be developing those skills the whole time that you're here. Don't wait until after you graduate to start developing those skills, right? So avoid making excuses, and there may be good reasons why something didn't happen or something went badly or whatever. 9 times out of 10, your instructor doesn't need the reason. The instructor wants to hear the plan for going forward. So, okay, you didn't turn in an assignment, or you missed a meeting or something like that. What's the plan? Like, what do we don't need to hear like kind of like all the reasons why it didn't happen. Try not to sound defeatist, like, oh, like I can't do anything like that. You can do things, and we're here to help you. But we need you to kind of to have that kind of positivity. If you're seeking our help, and we can support to an extent. But if you're having a hard time with that, then that would be counseling can be helpful with that. But make a positive impression through your email. Have a can-do attitude with your work. Focus on what you can do. So, like I said, have that can-do attitude, right? If you describe problems, there may be some problem going on or something like that. Propose solutions. So that's what I'm saying. Like, don't necessarily need all of the backstory and the excuses, but we do want to know, like, where are you at? How are we going to move forward with this if you're describing some sort of a problem? Don't ramble, so don't let it turn into a 1,000-word, diatribe. Don't vent. So you may feel upset and you may feel frustrated about a certain situation. Try to vent to family and friends, and this is something that we all do kind of in our professional lives. I may have complex feelings about a subject that I'm emailing about. I'm going to vent those in real time in a face-to-face conversation, maybe with somebody who is not involved in that situation, so I can just get my feelings out. Then I'm in a good space to then type up without sharing all of my emotions. Spell check and grammar check, these tools are available on computers. It should be readily available for you. So spell check and grammar check, think of college as a time to build your spelling and grammar skills. Lastly, read it out loud before you hit send. Every single time you will catch so many mistakes, so many things that you didn't want to say that way, so many missing words, so many misspelled words, things like that. You'll catch all of that just by reading it out loud. So read it out loud before you hit send. How do you close your email? It's really simple. Just say thank you in some form or another. It's funny, I was talking with a colleague one time and we were talking about how we say thank you at the end of the email, even when nobody did anything for us. It's just a standard way to close your email right now, these days. Like, historically you would close letters with like sincerely, and that's perfectly fine for an email too. But 9 times out of 10, if I get an email, the closing on that says thanks, comma, or thank you, comma, and then the name. So, say thank you in some form or another, close with your full name. So moving on, so we've got just a couple miscellaneous email related questions that I wanted to address. So first one is, can I send an email from a personal address, not via Canvas or my.ghc.edu? Can I send so I've got a Gmail account or like a Yahoo account, can I just use that? I want to use that for my email and send that email to my instructor. Well, you can do whatever you want, but I want you to be aware that an instructor will be cautious about replying to a personal address. That's why we have email features through Canvas and my.ghc.edu. For one thing, personal addresses can raise red flags for the recipient, for the instructor who's reading it or the staff member who's reading it. So if I get an email from duncanduck420@yahoo.com, and as for their name is listed as Nunya Business, I'm going to take a look at that and I'm going to say I don't know who this is. I may not want to respond to this. I may not even read it, depending on if I think it's junk mail, sometimes in our private emails or whatever, we may have to prevent, getting spam or unwanted emails. Sometimes we have these kind of rando accounts. I get it. But, think of, like I'm saying, think of college as like a workplace, like you're building your professionalism. So you want to kind of put a professional spin on your email as you send it out. So, so that's one reason why email might cause a red flag for an instructor. Whereas Canvas or your myghc.edu email address is very suitable, very, very appropriate. But more importantly, outside email is not private the way that Canvas and myghc.edu are. So FERPA prohibits GHC employees from communicating via outside email about anything that specifically mentions a student. So if I get an email from DuncanDuck420 and they say, hi, my name is whatever your name is, and they say, I want to know how I'm doing in your class, or I want to know, what time is our class again, because I want to show up there. I'm not going to respond to that email and tell them what time you're showing up to a classroom. I don't want to expose you to whatever that person, I'm hoping that person is you, but I don't know that. And so for that reason, not only do I not want to send that email, I am legally prohibited from sending that email. So I do not want to, I would only be able to respond to that type of email from a private outside email in generic terms about simple things. I wouldn't be able to talk about you, what classes you're taking, anything related to your assignments or the assignments that we're working on in class. I would have to kind of just say minimal or nothing. So use your Canvas or myghc.edu email address when communicating with your instructor. Lastly, can my parents send my instructor an email? So this sometimes comes up with maybe Running Start students or students who are in college for the first time. And so maybe your parents are involved in your education to a certain degree. That's not, that's not unheard of. However, as a college student, you need to communicate directly with your instructor. That's what we expect. So you're in college, so your parents are not in college. They may be in college, but they're not you. They shouldn't be on your behalf, in college. So beyond that, due to FERPA law, instructors cannot communicate with anyone other than the student about matters related to a student without a waiver. So if I get an email from your parent asking me whatever your parent is asking me, I'm not going to respond to that email because I'm prohibited from contacting with anybody other than you, unless you have a waiver. Even if you have a waiver on file, instructors are not obligated to discuss student matters with parents. And so in my particular case, I would still ignore that email from that parent. I would go to my Canvas and I would send an email to my student and I would say, hey student, like just so you know, I wouldn't say hey student, I would say dear student because I'm using a proper greeting, but I would level with them and I would say, hey, I just want to let you know what's going on. I received an email from someone who says they are your instructor or your parent, and I'm interested in communicating with you directly and building your professionalism, your accountability. And so, so in that type of situation, the way I handle it is I let the student know that if they want to communicate with me and have their parent read their emails, then they're free to share that with their parent. If they want to have a phone call or a face-to-face session and invite their parent to join, I'm willing to do that, but I'm not going to speak with a parent about one of my students. I'm going to speak only with my student about my student. So, and different instructors have different, kind of policies about that. But just so you know, that's something that we take very seriously because it's law and it's also your safety and your rights, your educational rights. So yeah, different instructors will have different methods for how they handle it, but just be aware of that. So your instructor, your parents may not necessarily be able to get in touch with your instructor. So that kind of falls to you. Thank you for listening to the presentation. That's all I've got to share for today. I'd like to open it up now for any questions, if you have any related to emails, any of the topics that we talked about.
I don't have any questions. One thing that came up when you were talking was I have my Canvas emails forwarded to my Gmail account, and I think on occasion I have hit reply, which now thinking about it probably sends a message from my Gmail account back to whoever, and I should go back to Canvas and do it that way. So that came up for me.
Yeah, I would say just use caution, and I'll say your instructors are kind of cautious about that too. And so in that type of situation, if we started on Canvas and then it ended up going to some personal email or something like that, that would have been something that the student sent. So that might not be so much of a drastic concern as if I just got some rando email from that other. Some email address I've never seen before, or something like that. But yeah, there may be limits to what we could talk about just due to that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Good presentation.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for watching. I hope you guys will let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to join the Writing Center at any time. We're open Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. You can find more information about the Writing Center in Canvas.